Quigley for participating in the Connecting You series. I'm really delighted to welcome you to what is designed to inspire. I'm conscious that with the coronavirus and the massive changes to society and to the legal system, that we are more physically disconnected than we ever have been. And so we were hoping to channel some of the great events that you participate in by a video recording to share the great depth of insight and wisdom and inspiration that you so often contribute to our community. So perhaps I can start off by asking you about how the VCAT is going with the challenges and the initiatives that I know you have been run off your feet implementing.
Thanks, Kathryn, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you in these, what I know is the most overused phrase, challenging times. But
that's so true.
That's true. But I think with challenges also come opportunities, and certainly for us, since the tribunal was closed on the commencement of the emergency, closed to the public, that automatically meant we had to very quickly pivot to a new way of working so that we could continue to deliver access to justice to the Victorian community, being part of the civil justice system and the most busy of the tribunals in Australia, and certainly with our 85,000 cases a year, being able to actually move quickly from our manual paper-based system to effectively all of the matters that we're able to deal with in a triage sense by telephone has been really challenging for us, because we're very technology light, and I would very much like us to be technology heavy, and no doubt one of the opportunities that has come out of the current environment has been that where we are able, and with some investment, to move to a more digital world is something that we've certainly embraced, but we've got a long way to go. So it's been challenging in the sense that predominantly we have done work by telephone conferencing, work on the papers. We've transitioned people to work from home. That's still a way to go in terms of how well and efficient that it might be done in the future, but being able to keep the tribunal running, and over the last 10 weeks we've listed over 7,000 matters, which is, I think, nothing short of miraculous.
I have to say that as a litigator, I have been really inspired by how the tribunal and the courts have responded to the crisis. You know, as a partner of a law firm and as an employer, I felt a huge burden to keep people in their jobs and to keep people at full employment and to keep the work coming in. And such an important part of our society is the justice system. And so I'm so heartened that, yes, there's been challenges, to use that word again, but we've kept going, 7,000 matters listed, and we're improving every day. So you've mentioned that there's been telephone hearings. What are we seeing in the coming weeks?
Well, one of the issues for us being a paper-based, manual-based systems way we operated was that, and we've certainly had on our agenda a digital transformation strategy. We have, in one of the divisions, in the Planning and Environment division, we were $5.2 million was made available to commence the digitisation of those files and move to an online platform and provide the infrastructure, hardware and training to do that. That's the first step in moving to digitisation throughout the tribunal. But in the meantime, that's a project which we have a very tight timeline to deliver, 12 weeks.
Wow.
I know, quite incredible.
I thought you were going to say 12 months.
I wish.
much more reasonable period.
Well, it's really the first step for us to move into that platform on an ongoing basis. But for us, adoption of online platforms such as Teams, Zoom, WebEx, and we've also trialled another platform called Our Mediation, which you may be familiar with, has been used in the federal court. Each of those have their strengths and weaknesses for the different types of matters. So clearly Teams works for us internally, and there were issues in early days, as many people know, with Zoom, but we're now running a number of matters now by the Zoom platform. WebEx to a lesser extent, and with iMediation, because it has some other characteristics and abilities, that has been particularly good for compulsory conferences and mediations, because you can put people in other rooms and upload and download documents and the like, which is a facility that isn't always needed for a simple hearing that perhaps one of those other platforms might work. We haven't settled on any one in particular. We're having a go at everything that's out there and just see where we land over the next 6 months.
And the platforms are themselves improving all the time.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's for sure. And I think as we're all learning, people, I think, have perhaps for the first time in their life engaged with a video platform for social purposes.
Yes.
And so that has helped break down, I think, some of the anxiety with using that those alternatives rather than a face-to-face hearing for people actually in the workplace. But it's a steep learning curve, and every day there's something new, something we learn, but I think that's the same for everybody.
It's so true. And I think that the VCAT is in a particularly unique position because of the great interface with unrepresented litigants and the heavy exposure to people that are not with the law as well as the processes. And so we're layering the difficulties that people have in interacting. How have you found that the litigants have responded?
I think in the early days, what we did here was when we first went into the COVID environment, we limited what matters that we were listing to those that were of personal and financial and medical safety, and evictions. So the guardianship matters, human rights matters, medical treatment, both residential and retail evictions, they were prioritised, and any other stay or injunction application. All of the other divisions, we set to triaging all of the files and seeing what way we could actually get them moving by directions, hearings and the like. So everything between the end of March and the 15th of May was adjourned to a date to be fixed. We are now and have now started listing matters in some form, be they on the papers, by a video platform of some form, teleconferencing where that happens. Unfortunately, if we're waiting for a face-to-face hearing, we're looking at perhaps sometime in 2021. So it has been, telephone being perhaps the most basic of technology, has been the easiest for litigants in person to deal with. It comes with its challenges, because one of the issues that we recognised pretty early on was that when a litigant was participating in a telephone conference, it was hard initially, until we got some guidelines and some protocols in place, to ensure as best we could the dignity of the hearing. We have had some interesting experiences of litigants being on the end of the phone in their living room with the telly on and the dog barking, or in the supermarket, or driving, or worse still, in the bathroom. So lots of stories there. That things we think we've perhaps in the education that we've sent out or litigants about what is appropriate behaviour for a telephone hearing, let alone a video hearing, that behaviour is starting to be a bit more prescribed.
Well, that's good to hear. I was interested by what you said about how people have adapted and they've learnt to use video conferencing when it hasn't been familiar in the past. Perhaps you could share a story with us of something that's happened at the VCAT that's really warmed your spirit about the human response.
I think people have reacted sort of differentially. Some people have adapted really well. I'm sure this is not a unique experience, particularly in lots of offices where people are using Teams and Zoom for their Teams meeting. But the competition about who can have the most interesting backdrop, I think it's probably a competition that's probably running in a whole range of different places. And so, you still have to have some humour in life, despite all the worries and anxieties that are out there in this COVID environment. And so some little things like that have been fun, and certainly we don't do that in hearings, but at least amongst members of the staff and tribunal, that's been quite lovely. The other is that our guardianship list has continued to function, and it's such an important aspect of our work. The way that our members have adapted to, certainly in the early days, where our telephone system was 45 lines with only capacity for 2 parties to be on a conference call. So if you had a guardian matter, for example, we had multiple people who wanted to participate, we would have multiple phones, often with the member with their own mobile as a backup, and yet they made it work. And I think that testament to my fabulous members and their commitment to the work, but also people grateful that those really key important matters have continued to be able to be heard, and lots of lovely messages. Certainly lots of messages about how frustrated people are as well, but lots of lovely messages about how they've been really pleased that we've been able to continue to provide that service.
It's one of the things that I've observed in a different way, but there's been, I think, a preparedness to let a little bit of the professional facade down and let each other into our lives, even where there's not that deep relationship. I was speaking with an employee of a client who I had not spoken with before, and he was, we were talking about an issue and he was explaining a complex spreadsheet to me, and his kids came in on the call, and you could see that he was mortified, like, where is his spouse? Why are the children on the call? And it was actually, don't worry, you're helping us out. We can keep going, it's fine.
Not the end of the world.
And then his spouse comes in looking very harried that how did the kids make it into the conference? But it's fine. And so that empathy, that we're all in this together, and everyone's got their challenges, everyone's got kids at home, or parents they're looking after, or whatever the different challenges are, we're in this together, and I've been very warmed by that.
I think we've been very large, much more forgiving, because
so true.
It's very hard to be incredibly sort of prim and dignified all of the time when something like the dog or the cat, or I was in a meeting one day with one of our staff members, and he was speaking to us, and somebody knocked on the window who had wanted to take some basil or some rosemary from his front garden. So he went from this really key important meeting to, excuse me, yeah, sure, take as much as you like. So those little domestic insights.
Yes.
And I think what's also been really interesting is where people have been conducting their conferences from home, not necessarily just in the law, but more broadly, those wonderful bookcases that you see. I think Gideon Hayes is probably the best one I've seen.
So that also raises the issue, because so many people are working from home now, how we manage the challenges of having our workplace in our home, and people having homeschooling. How it seems to me that it's never been so important that we take steps to spark joy in our lives and to alleviate stress. How is it, if I may ask, that you look after yourself in what has been really an unprecedented time?
I think for me, the ability to go for a run or a walk and clear the head has been really, really important. As the weather gets worse, that's getting harder to do. And now the days are shorter, although not for much longer. We start getting
not long.
Which would be good. I think I think perhaps my son might say, well, my answer was alcohol, but I totally disavow that. No, that is not true, because the going for a walk along the river or around the Tang, although that's quite busy these days, has been really, really, really good. Being out in the fresh air, where there's water, where there's trees, greenery is such an important component, I think.
Yeah, I have to say I did enjoy that few weeks we had where there was very little traffic on the road. I thought the birds were so much louder. Did you notice
incredible?
that?
I think I've actually made the same observation at home. I'm sure there are more birds. It's probably because they're more observable. The other thing I thought was incredible over that early time when there wasn't so much traffic was how clear the night sky was.
Yes.
And when that full moon occurred last month, I think it was, I remember heading home as the moon was rising, and it was so spectacular and so clear, you almost felt like you could touch it. And that's not an experience we often see in the inner city, like in the country or perhaps down the coast or something. And that has been, it really reminds you of the impact we have. Sure.
That prompts me, is there something from this time, as we're re-entering slowly the more normal ways that we have, is there something from this time that you have learnt that you would hope stays with you?
I think having not such a hectic, what we packed in, not that life has been any less busy or work hasn't been certainly less demanding, but I suppose one part, I miss going to live theatre, going to art galleries, I miss having dinner out with my friends, all of those things. But again, it's the acknowledgement that I suppose for myself, I haven't really used video technology for keeping in touch with friends. I might send an email or whatever, but I still handwrite letters. But recently we caught up with some friends who live in Colorado, who we see maybe every couple of years. We might email a couple of times a year just to check in on them, share photos and the like. But, we'll organise a Zoom meeting with them. And we're thinking, why haven't we done this before? So in some ways the world became much smaller, even though it was a virtual experience. And yet we would also schedule in a regular Zoom meeting with my immediate next door neighbour, who is very often in our house. And so that part was really weird. So it was like she was so far away, just over the laneway, and they were tens of thousands of miles away. And yet so I'd like to think keeping up those regular little contacts, even if you can't meet up with people. So I think there's always going to be room for that.
And having the space in your life to do it.
That's right, yeah.
Our first guest in the series was Justice Costello, and she was saying exactly the same thing. It almost makes friendship egalitarian. If you can see people, well, then you'll be out to dinner with them on Friday night. Whereas when you can't go out and see anyone, you can think, well, which friend will I Zoom with? Because geography is not a criteria.
That's right. And it's almost like in the early days when we were not too sure how long it would be before you could actually be within proximity to anybody. Every night, who are we going to Zoom tonight? Because if we went one night without checking in on someone, you almost felt too isolated, and you didn't want to watch the news because it was just so depressing.
Nor has it got better,
No,
at least in
it's
world
true.
affairs.
Yeah.
Perhaps we could have a little bit of a chat about your stellar career. I know that there would be many younger people listening today that must look at all that you've achieved and think, how can I take steps today to ensure that I have such a rewarding and successful career? And that raises a very fundamental question as to what is a successful career? How do you define for yourself success?
I think doing work that is meaningful is really important. Certainly there are periods of my life at the bar where, yes, I was very busy and was very successful, and you can certainly earn a very good income. But at the end of the day, that's just numbers on a page. Sure, you could also buy some nice shoes and handbags or whatever, but there's only so many shoes and handbags you actually can accumulate over time before you then start to have to declutter and move on. But I think definitely work that is meaningful is so incredibly important. And in the law, there is much of that work to be done that is meaningful, and what's attractive to a particular individual doesn't have to be the same work. Finding myself in the planning and environment area was something that, in a sense, was just fortuitous. But once I discovered what that meant, the sorts of cases and the impact you have on building community as well as buildings and heritage, both natural and built form heritage, the stories that sit behind that, for me, make that work very, very rewarding and very interesting and constantly changing, and has so many layers of the economic, the environmental, the social, and being all of those different layers, sometimes some having a greater importance than others. It was never boring. I don't think I ever got bored. In fact, I was joking the other day about preparing my son was referring to some preparation of some cross-examination in relation to a wind farm project, and I started to reflect on the incredible range and diversity of types of matters that came across my desk in 30 years. It's pretty extraordinary.
And what you say is so true, particularly about that area of the law, because there's so much that goes into personal well-being that is the community in which we live. It really matters to how well people can lead their lives.
Yes, and I think that good planning and sensible decisions that are for the greater good will always provide the building blocks for a solid society. I'm sure there are others who do other type of work who equally find their areas fascinating. For me, there was certainly I probably wasn't that interested in analysis of traffic movements and the like, but a really important component of how a city and a place functions, how we get around. So even though might be on the surface lots of numbers, which are not my forte, but the outcome is critically important.
And they really, I'm actually doing a case at the moment about the loss of a right turn in and out of a property. And it really matters to the business.
Yep.
Whether the access and the congestion.
And there are so many things, so many aspects of of development and how we arrange things can be little irritations or major positives.
Yes.
So it's quite. It has you can touch and feel it. I suppose that's the other thing about that area of the law. And
would you have a standout highlight?
Oh, I think I absolutely have to say my involvement with the Abbotsford Convent as I think probably a medium sort of, I don't know how long I've been at the bar, maybe 10 years. So had the opportunity to work with that amazing group of people who were opposing the redevelopment of the convent site for residential development, and came up with an alternative proposal, which is the arts education and wellbeing precinct that it is now. And even now, when I go back to the convent, which I do quite regularly, although not at the moment because it's closed, or has been, I still feel that wonderful sense of how incredibly important having a really committed group of people bringing all their different expertise and skills, and how incredibly lucky I was to be part of that.
Mm. And it's so, I think, encouraging that we all as people have things that enliven us, and it's different for everybody. And together we can make a great society.
For sure.
So if you look back on your younger self, what would you say, you're just starting out, what lesson do you wish you could tell yourself back then that you didn't know?
Yeah, I think have more confidence and back yourself earlier. I think at every step of the way, so I think each step of the way I've probably, if not been pushed, I've certainly had a bit of a shove to move to that next step. So even going to the bar, well, yes, getting a job in the law in the first place, then leaving and going to the bar, and then sort of 15 years down the track, taking Silk. Each of those decisions, not planned, they were opportunities that presented, and I sort of had the view, well, I'll give it a go, see what happens, what's the worst that can happen. And I'd say that's even the case in, I've just ticked over 2 years as the president of the Tribunal, so just over 2.5 years as a Supreme Court judge. And I have to say it was the same decision-making process 2.5 years ago.
Yeah. And what do you look forward to?
What do I look forward to? That's interesting. For me, personally, I would really like to see, from a professional point of view, the tribunal go from strength to strength. We have fabulous people here, really hardworking and dedicated people, and what we produce with what resources we have is nothing short of miraculous. To be able to deliver better infrastructure for us here is an absolute commitment of mine over the next 3 years. We need to move out of this building, so move into premises which are much more fit for purpose and also designed to make working life more collaborative and happier, I think, because architecture has a lot to do with that. So there, from a professional point of view, clearly there are challenges all the time with different cases that come your way, and I don't mind, which ones they sort of throw at me. From a personal point of view, to stay fit and healthy and to stay grounded is really important. I've enough friends and family around me who make sure of that, so I'm not too worried about meeting that aspiration.
And so just before we wrap up, perhaps you could share with us a personal hobby, or maybe it's reading or watching movies or something that is your favourite. So I know that everyone's got a bit more time on the weekends than they used to. Do you have a favourite book, movie?
I think I've always been an avid reader, but I think I've just recently read the Julia Baird book, Phosphorescence.
Oh, have you? It's on my list.
Oh, absolutely. It is a book for the time.
Really?
I read it over a weekend, wet weekend, and from the moment you start reading it, she writes so beautifully. She is so educated and has such beautiful references. But the encapsulation of wonder and appreciating wonder in the natural environment and in natural things and enjoying the small things, it really, I thought that's why I think it's such a book for the time. So that would be on my I'd tell everybody in the recent time, you must read it. It is just a fact, and in it there are some tips for life as well. She talks about some observations her mother made, or rules for life, her mother, and the first one was grace and forgiveness, and I'm sort of working on that one. Exercising the kindness muscle, which I think is a fabulous thing.
What a great expression.
Isn't it great? And the other is not to overthink resilience, just get on with it.
Yeah.
And I just think encapsulating those 3 rules about life, I came away from that book, apart